I still remember the exact sound of the applause. It was sharp, polished, controlled. The kind of applause people give in a glass-walled conference room when they want the executives to notice they are impressed. I stood just outside that room on the 36th floor of Brightline Analytics, holding a folder against my chest so tightly that the edges bent beneath my fingers. Inside, my boss, Richard Blake, stood at the front of the room in his navy suit, one hand in his pocket, the other casually holding a clicker. Behind him on the giant screen was the final slide of my project. 11 months of late nights, ruined weekends, canceled dinners, early morning calls with exhausted clients, endless spreadsheets, and more coffee than sleep. Every graph on that screen had come from my analysis. Every client risk score had come from my model. Every renewal strategy had come from conversations I had personally handled, sometimes while sitting alone in the office long after the cleaning crew had gone home. And yet, there it was. At the bottom of the slide, beneath the words, was one name. Not mine. Not even my team's. Just his. For a second I thought maybe I was looking at a draft. Maybe there had been some mistake. Maybe the final version still had my name somewhere else. But then Richard smiled at the room and said, "When I first envisioned Meridian almost a year ago, I knew we needed more than a client retention plan. We needed a complete trust recovery system." My stomach turned cold. When I first envisioned, the words hit harder than I expected, because I knew exactly when Meridian had started. It had started at 11:43 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, when I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, surrounded by printed client complaints and half-finished tea, realizing that Brightline wasn't losing customers because our software was bad. We were losing them because no one was listening. That was my insight, my plan, my work. Richard had not envisioned Meridian. Richard had ignored it until it started working. Then he stole it. Inside the room, Victoria Hayes, our chief operating officer, leaned forward with a look I had been hoping to earn for almost a year. Respect, approval, recognition. Only she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Richard. "This is exactly the kind of leadership we need at the next level," Victoria said. The room applauded again. Richard lowered his head modestly, as if he were humbled by praise he had no right to receive. I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean, quiet break. For most of my career, I had believed that hard work had a way of speaking for itself. I believed that if I stayed professional, stayed patient, and kept producing results, eventually the right people would notice. I thought silence made me mature. I thought loyalty made me valuable. I thought being useful would make me safe. Standing outside that conference room, watching my boss receive applause for the work he had taken from me, I finally understood the truth. Silence does not protect you. Sometimes silence only makes it easier for someone else to rewrite your story. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. Executives stood up, shook Richard's hand, and congratulated him. Through the glass, I watched him laugh with Victoria like a man who had just won something. Maybe he had. A promotion, a title, a future built on my back. I stepped away before anyone could see my face. By the time Richard came out of the conference room, I was standing near the coffee station, pretending to read an email on my phone. "Natalie," he said. His voice was warm, smooth, practiced. I looked up. He smiled like nothing had happened. "Great work getting those support materials cleaned up," he said. "Support materials." For a moment I thought I had misheard him. "Support materials?" I repeated. Richard glanced around the hallways, then lowered his voice. "Listen, I know this was a big morning. Emotions can run high." I stared at him. He kept smiling. "But you did great support work on this. Really. Don't take it personally. There are certain moments in life when a person reveals exactly who they are. Not through anger, not through screaming, but through calm, casual cruelty." Richard wasn't nervous. He wasn't ashamed. He truly believed he could reduce nearly a year of my work to support materials and expect me to smile. I said nothing. That seemed to please him. He reached out and lightly tapped the folder in my arms. "Let's stay focused," he said. "There's still a lot to do, and I'll need you sharp for the client follow-ups." I looked down at his hand touching the folder. The folder contained an older printed version of the Meridian presentation, the original version. The one from before Richard had edited it. On the first page under it said, my name was still there, in black ink, clear as daylight. I looked back at Richard. "Of course," I said quietly. His smile widened. "That's the spirit." Then he walked away. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds, listening to the soft hum of the office around me. Phones ringing, keyboards tapping, someone laughing near the elevators. The normal sounds of a company that had no idea it had just watched a theft and called it leadership. My hands were still shaking, but my mind had gone strangely calm. I walked back to my desk. Maya Collins, our data analyst and the closest thing I had to a real friend at Brightline, looked up the second I sat down. Her expression changed immediately. "What happened?" she asked. I opened my laptop. "Maya," I said, "did Richard remove my name from the presentation?" She didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. Her face tightened. "Natalie, did he?" Maya exhaled slowly. "Yes." I nodded once. She pushed her chair closer to my desk and lowered her voice. "I told you he was doing this. I told you months ago." "I know. He's been asking for your files before every executive meeting. He's been changing the deck names. He's been presenting your models like they came from him." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." Her voice sharpened. "He just used Meridian to get promoted, didn't he?" I stared at my screen. The company email had already arrived. My chest tightened, but I opened it anyway. There he was, a polished corporate photo, a paragraph about his visionary leadership, another paragraph about how Project Meridian had transformed Brightline's client retention strategy under Richard's direction. I read the sentence 3 times. Maya whispered, "Oh my God." Something inside me went very still. For 11 months I had been afraid of looking difficult, afraid of being called emotional, afraid that if I defended myself too strongly, people would say I wasn't a team player. Richard knew that. He had counted on it. He had counted on my silence, my professionalism, my fear of making a scene, and maybe for a while he had been right. But not anymore. Maya watched me carefully. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened a blank email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about every late night I had spent cleaning up Richard's vague promises to clients. I thought about every meeting he had excluded me from, only to send me a message afterward asking for quick notes and talking points. I thought about Olivia Grant, the CEO of Grantwell Retail Group, telling me over the phone, "Natalie, you're the only person at Brightline who actually tells me the truth." I thought about all the customer histories, risk notes, renewal strategies, and relationship maps I had built from scratch. Yes, Brightline owned the system. Yes, the files were on the company server. But the trust, the judgment, the context behind every number? Richard did not own that. He didn't even understand it. Maya leaned closer. "Natalie," I typed the first line. Maya looked at the screen and froze. "Are you serious?" I kept typing. Maya covered her mouth. "Natalie." I stopped typing for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it. I had spent almost a year begging the wrong people to value me. That was over. I finished the email, professional, brief, clean, no accusations, no emotion, no paragraphs explaining the obvious to people who had chosen not to see it. Before I hit send, I looked once more at the glass conference room. Richard was still inside, talking with Victoria, pointing at the screen like a man explaining a masterpiece he had painted. I almost laughed. He thought he had taken everything. He thought the title mattered most. He thought the slide deck was the project. He had no idea that Project Meridian was not just a presentation. It was a living network of client trust, private concerns, hidden risks, decision-maker relationships, and carefully repaired damage. And he had never bothered to learn how any of it worked. I clicked. The email disappeared from my screen. For the first time that morning, my hands stopped shaking. Maya stared at me. "What now?" she asked. I leaned back in my chair and looked toward Richard's office. "Now," I said, "we see how well he leads the project he claims he built." At 3:17 p.m., Richard opened my resignation email. At 3:19 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from him appeared on the screen. I read it once. Then I typed back. I placed my phone face down on the desk. Across the office, Richard's door opened. He stepped out searching for me. And for the first time since I had started working at Brightline Analytics, I did not look away. 10 months before Richard Blake stood in front of the executive team and called my work his vision, Brightline Analytics was quietly falling apart. Not in the dramatic way companies fall apart in movies. There were no shouting matches in the hallways. No emergency news reports, no security guards escorting executives out of the building. It was worse than that. It was slow, silent, polished on the outside and rotting underneath. From the outside, Brightline still looked successful. We had a sleek office in downtown Chicago, a glass lobby, smiling receptionists, expensive coffee machines, and a website filled with words like "and." But inside the company, everyone knew the truth. Our biggest clients were leaving, or at least they were preparing to. Grantwell Retail Group had stopped expanding its contract. Ellison Foods had delayed renewal talks twice. Northstar Home Brands had requested a full performance review and used the phrase vendor reassessment, which in corporate language usually meant we are already looking for someone to replace you. Together, those three accounts represented more than 40% of our enterprise revenue. If we lost them, Brightline would not collapse overnight, but people would be laid off, departments would be cut, promotions would disappear, and executives who had spent years pretending everything was fine would suddenly need someone to blame. That was the atmosphere inside the emergency meeting Richard called on a gray Monday morning in November. The conference room was full, but nobody wanted to speak. Sales blamed client success blamed product blamed unrealistic promises from sales. Finance blamed market conditions, because finance always blamed market conditions when they didn't want to say the truth out loud. Richard stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up just enough to look serious but not messy. He looked around the room and said, "If we lose these accounts, we don't just lose revenue, we lose credibility." People nodded. They always nodded when Richard said something obvious in a serious voice. He clicked to the next slide. It showed 3 client logos, 3 renewal dates, and 3 red risk labels. Richard tapped the screen with his finger. "We need a retention strategy, fast." Then he looked around the room. Thoughts? Silence. Someone from sales cleared his throat and suggested a discount. Someone from product suggested a roadmap update. Someone from client success suggested more frequent check-in calls. Richard nodded at each suggestion like he was collecting wisdom, but I could tell he wasn't satisfied. Neither was I, because none of those ideas addressed the real problem. The real problem was not pricing. It was not product features. It was not meeting frequency. The real problem was that Brightline had spent years treating clients like accounts instead of people. Every department saw a different piece of the customer, but no one saw the whole thing. Sales saw contract value, product saw feature requests, client success saw support tickets, finance saw renewal dates, executives saw revenue forecasts, but nobody seemed to ask one very simple question. I had been asking that question for months, quietly, on my own, because my job title was Senior Client Strategy Manager, but in reality I had become the person people called when a client was too angry for standard customer service and too important to ignore. I handled the uncomfortable calls, the late-night escalations, the polite but dangerous emails from executives who no longer trusted us. I had listened to Olivia Grant, CEO of Grantwell Retail Group, pause for 5 seconds before saying, "Natalie, I don't think your team understands how much damage this reporting issue caused us." I had listened to Marcus Ellison, CFO of Ellison Foods, say, "Your sales team promised predictive margin analysis. What we received was a dashboard with 3 broken filters." I had listened to Dana Kim, Chief Operations Officer at Northstar Home Brands, say, "Every time we explain the same problem, Brightline sends us someone new." Those conversations were not in Richard's slides. They were in my notebooks, my call transcripts, my private spreadsheets, my late-night thoughts when I couldn't sleep because I knew we were losing clients for reasons nobody wanted to admit. So when Richard asked for thoughts in that meeting, I raised my hand. He looked slightly surprised. "Natalie?" I sat up straighter. "I don't think a discount is going to fix this," I said. The man from sales frowned. "Discounts always help. They help when price is the problem," I said. "Price is not the problem." Richard leaned back slightly. "Go on." I looked around the table. A few people were watching me. Most looked tired, so I said the thing nobody wanted to say. "The clients don't trust us." The room went still. I continued before anyone could interrupt. "They don't trust our data. They don't trust our timelines. They don't trust our handoffs. And most importantly, they don't trust that we understand their business." Someone from product shifted in his chair. That seems a little harsh. It's accurate, I said. My voice was calm, but my heart was beating fast. I wasn't used to speaking that directly in a room full of directors, but I had heard too many clients trying not to sound angry. I knew what the anger meant. Richard folded his arms. So what do you suggest? I opened the folder in front of me. I had not planned to present that morning, not formally. But I had brought my notes because I had learned long ago that being prepared was the only protection I had in rooms where people liked to pretend they didn't remember what women had said 5 minutes earlier. I think we need a client recovery framework, I said. Not a general retention campaign, not a discount package, a structured recovery plan built around each client's actual pain points, decision makers, renewal risks, and trust gaps. Richard stared at me. For the first time that morning, he looked interested. I slid a printed page across the table. I've been mapping the 3 highest risk accounts, Grantwell, Ellison, and Northstar. They all have different reasons for being unhappy, but the pattern is the same. We keep responding to symptoms instead of root causes. I turned to the first page. Grantwell doesn't need another dashboard. They need reporting accuracy and executive accountability. Second page. Ellison doesn't need more features. They need us to stop over-promising and give them a realistic 3-year value model. Third page. Northstar doesn't need more check-in calls. They need one stable internal owner who actually remembers their history. No one spoke. I looked at Richard. If we want to keep them, we need to stop selling and start rebuilding trust. That was the first time I used the phrase, not renewing contracts, not protecting revenue, rebuilding trust. Richard slowly picked up the printed pages. His eyes moved across my notes. The room stayed quiet. Then he said, "This is strong." I felt something in my chest loosen. Not pride exactly. Hope. Richard looked at me and nodded. Really strong work, Natalie. For one foolish second, I believed that was the beginning of my breakthrough. I believed I had finally said something important enough that it could not be ignored. Richard turned to the room. This is what we need, a structured recovery initiative. He pointed at my pages. Natalie, build this out. Full framework, client-by-client strategy, risk model, renewal map, executive talking points. I want a draft by next Friday. Next Friday. It was an impossible deadline. I said, "That's fast," he smiled. "So are our renewal risks." People chuckled. I did not, but I nodded, because back then I still believed that saying yes to impossible things was how you proved you belonged. That night, I stayed at the office until 10:48 p.m. The city outside the windows turned dark blue, then black. One by one, office lights across nearby buildings blinked off. The cleaning crew came and went. The coffee in my mug went cold. Maya found me still at my desk, surrounded by printouts. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Building the recovery framework." She dropped her bag beside my desk. "Richard gave you the whole thing?" "He asked me to build it out." Maya looked at the stacks of notes. "By yourself?" "For now." She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Natalie, that man just handed you a burning building and called it a leadership opportunity." I kept typing. It could be one. For him, maybe. I looked up. She was standing with her arms crossed, watching me carefully. "What?" Maya lowered her voice. "You need to be careful." "About what?" "Richard," I sighed. "Maya, please don't start. I'm serious. I know you don't like him." "I don't like people who use other people's work as elevator buttons." I gave her a tired look. "He said it was strong work." "Of course he did. Useful things are always strong right before someone takes them." I wanted to dismiss her. I really did. But Maya had been at Brightline longer than I had, and she had survived the company by noticing things other people missed. Still, I wasn't ready to believe Richard would steal from me. Maybe because believing that would mean admitting I was not being mentored. I was being used. So I said, "If this works, leadership will see it." Maya pulled a chair over and sat beside me. "Will they see it because your name is on it?" I didn't answer. She pointed at my laptop. "Put your name on everything. It's internal work. Put your name on it." "Maya, I mean it, Natalie. Every model, every draft, every meeting note, every version. Make sure there's a trail." I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. "You sound paranoid." "No," she said. "I sound experienced." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Maya looked at the screen and asked, "What are you calling it?" I looked at the empty project title box. I had been avoiding that part. A good corporate name had to sound important without meaning too much. It had to be clean, confident, and slightly overdramatic. I thought about the clients, lost trust, lost direction, a company that had been moving without a real compass. Then I typed. Maya tilted her head. Meridian? A fixed line for direction, I said. Something you use to navigate. She smiled faintly. That's annoyingly good. For the first time that night, I laughed. That was how Project Meridian began. Not in Richard's office, not in an executive strategy session, not from some grand leadership vision. It began at my desk after everyone else had gone home, with cold coffee, client complaints, Maya's warning, and the stubborn belief that if I did the work well enough, no one would be able to erase me from it. Over the next few weeks, Meridian consumed my life. I built client profiles so detailed they looked less like account summaries and more like psychological maps. For Grantwell Retail Group, I identified that Olivia Grant did not care about flashy product demos. She cared about operational damage. If Brightline wanted her trust back, we had to show exactly where our reporting failures had hurt her teams and exactly how we would prevent them from happening again. For Ellison Foods, I built a financial risk model because Marcus Ellison hated vague promises. He wanted numbers, conservative numbers, numbers that admitted uncertainty instead of hiding it. For North Star Home Brands, I created a relationship map showing every person Brightline had assigned to their account in the last 18 months. There were seven different internal owners. No wonder they felt abandoned. I turned all of it into a framework. Client pain points, trust gaps, decision-maker psychology, renewal risk score, recovery actions, executive script, follow-up timeline, data proof, ownership chain. It was the first system Brightline had ever had that treated clients as relationships instead of contracts. And it started working. Slowly at first. Grantwell agreed to a technical correction plan. Ellison accepted a revised value review. North Star stopped threatening vendor reassessment and agreed to another executive meeting. Richard noticed immediately. At first, he praised me. "This is excellent, Natalie." Then he started asking me to send him updates before meetings, just so I can stay aligned. Then he asked for the raw spreadsheets. Easier if I can speak to the numbers directly. Then he asked me to draft his talking points. You know the client context best. Every request sounded reasonable by itself. That was the dangerous part. Nothing looked like theft at first. It looked like collaboration. It looked like management. It looked like my boss giving me visibility. Until one afternoon, I walked past conference room C and heard Richard's voice through the half-open door. He was speaking to Victoria Hayes. "We realized early on that the issue wasn't retention," Richard said. "It was trust recovery." That became the foundation of my Meridian framework. My steps slowed. My Meridian framework. I stood outside the door. Victoria said, "That's a smart angle." Richard replied, "Thank you. I've been shaping it for a while." I felt the blood drain from my face. A normal person might have walked in. A braver person might have corrected him right there. But I stood frozen in the hallway, telling myself there must be an explanation. Maybe he was simplifying. Maybe he would mention my name later. Maybe this was how directors spoke about teamwork. Maybe I was overreacting. That was the second mistake I made. When the meeting ended, Richard came out and saw me standing there. For half a second, his expression changed. Just half a second. Then he smiled. "Natalie, perfect timing." I looked at him. "I heard you talking about Meridian." "Good," he said easily. "Victoria's very interested." "You called it your framework." He blinked once. Then he gave a small, patient smile, the kind adults give children who are asking inconvenient questions. "Natalie, don't get caught up in wording. Wording matters. Results matter," he corrected. "And this is getting results." I waited for him to say more, to reassure me, to acknowledge my role, to say, "Of course everyone knows you built the foundation." He did not. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder, lightly, possessively. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. "You're making me look very good." He laughed as if it were a compliment. I did not laugh. That evening, Maya found me in the break room staring at a vending machine I had no intention of buying anything from. "What happened?" she asked. I told her. Every word. When I finished, Maya closed her eyes for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Now we stop being polite. I can't accuse him without proof." "You don't need to accuse him today. You need to document everything." I looked at her. She took out her phone and started listing things on her fingers. Save every original file. Keep version history. Follow up verbal requests with email. If he asks for a model, send it with a note that says attached is the model I built for X account. If he asks you to draft his talking points, write, based on my client call with Olivia, here are the recommended talking points. I stared at her. She continued, make the truth boring, written, and impossible to deny. That sentence stayed with me. So I did. From that day forward, I became careful. Not loud, not confrontational, careful. Every file had my name. Every model had creation dates. Every recommendation was sent by email. Every client call summary listed who attended, what was discussed, and what I recommended. Richard still praised me. He still smiled. He still said things like, we're building something big here. But I had started to understand that when Richard said he meant and Project Meridian was saving Brightline, but no one at the top knew who was really holding it together. Not yet. The first thing Richard stole was not the project. It was my seat at the table. That was how it began. Quietly, professionally, with calendar changes, vague explanations, and polite little lies that were easy to miss if you wanted to believe the best in people. 2 weeks after I overheard Richard call Meridian my framework, I received a calendar update for the Grantwell Executive Review. Originally, the meeting had included me, Richard, Maya, Victoria Hayes, and 3 executives from Grantwell Retail Group, including Olivia Grant herself. I had spent 6 days preparing for that meeting. 6 days building a risk summary that showed exactly why Grantwell's trust in Brightline had collapsed. 6 days cleaning data from 3 different systems because nobody had bothered to keep the reporting consistent. 6 days turning Olivia's complaints into a plan that did not sound defensive, desperate, or dishonest. Then, at 8:12 p.m. the night before the meeting, the invite disappeared from my calendar. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I refreshed the page. Nothing. I checked my email. There it was. My name was no longer on the guest list. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I messaged Richard. He replied 9 minutes later. I read the message twice, senior level. That was the first time he used those words against me. Not openly, not harshly. Just enough to remind me where I stood. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, deleted it again. Finally, I wrote, then I sat there hating myself for the word because I did not understand. I understood the strategy. I understood the client. I understood the risk. I understood the data. What I did not understand was why the person who knew the least would be the one sitting in the room. Still, I sent the notes. But this time I followed Maya's advice. The subject line read, in the body I wrote, I attached the file. Then I saved the email. A minute later, Maya's message popped up. I looked across the office. She was sitting 3 rows away, staring at me over the top of her monitor. I typed back. She did not reply immediately. Then a second message followed. I had already started. The next morning I arrived early, too early. The office still smelled like carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. The city outside the windows was pale and gray, Lake Michigan barely visible through the morning haze. The Grantwell meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. At 8:47, I watched Richard walk toward conference room A with a leather portfolio under his arm. My portfolio, or at least the contents were mine. He passed my desk and stopped. Natalie, he said, like he had just remembered I existed. Can you stay close to your email during the meeting? I looked up. Why? In case something comes up. Something like a question about the strategy? He smiled. Exactly. I said nothing. He lowered his voice. Don't look so tense. This is good for us. Us. There it was again. That word he used when he needed my labor. Never when he took the credit. I watched him enter the room. Through the glass wall, I saw Olivia Grant already seated, arms crossed, face unreadable. She wore a cream blazer and had the stillness of someone who did not waste energy pretending to be impressed. I liked Olivia, not because she was easy, she was not. I liked her because she was honest. If she was angry, she said so. If something did not make sense, she stopped the meeting. If someone tried to hide behind vague language, she cut straight through it. Which was why I knew Richard was in danger before he did. At 9:18, my inbox pinged. Richard. I stared at the message. That number was in the second paragraph of the notes I had sent him. I replied. 3 minutes later, another email. I closed my eyes. That was not a small detail. That was one of the most important details. Olivia hated Monday reports because Brightline's automated weekend data sync often failed, which meant Grantwell's regional teams started the week with incorrect inventory projections. It had caused real operational damage. I typed, another email came 7 minutes later. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. Richard was sitting in front of one of our most important clients, pretending to lead a strategy he could not even navigate without me feeding him answers from outside the room. I replied. After that, there was a longer pause. Then the conference room door opened. Richard stepped out, phone in hand, face tight. He walked quickly toward my desk. "We need to talk." He stood up. "What happened?" He looked over his shoulder, then lowered his voice. "Olivia is asking why you're not in the meeting." I felt a sharp, unexpected satisfaction. "What did you tell her?" I said we're streamlining internal attendance. "And what did she say?" Richard's jaw flexed. "She said she wants the person who built the recovery map in the room." For 1 second, I let myself enjoy the silence between us. Then I asked, "Do you want me to join?" His eyes narrowed. The question trapped him. If he said yes, he admitted he needed me. If he said no, he risked irritating Olivia. Finally, he said, "Come in, but let me lead." Of course, let me lead. The unofficial motto of every man who wanted a woman to rescue him quietly. I picked up my notebook and followed him into the conference room. Olivia Grant looked at me immediately. "Natalie," she said. Her voice softened slightly. "Good. Now maybe we can discuss the actual issue." Richard gave a tight laugh. "Natalie has been supporting the analysis." Olivia did not look at him. "She has been leading the analysis from what I've seen." The room went still. Victoria Hayes glanced at me, then at Richard. Richard's smile hardened. I sat down. For the next 40 minutes, I answered every question Richard could not. I explained the reporting variance. I explained the weekend sync failures. I explained why Grantwell's regional managers had lost confidence in our dashboard. I explained the 3-stage correction plan, the accountability timeline, and the reason I recommended executive-level status updates for the first 6 weeks. Olivia listened. Victoria listened. Richard sat very still. At the end of the meeting, Olivia looked directly at me and said, "That is the first clear explanation I've heard from Brightline in 6 months." I said, "You deserved one sooner." Richard's head turned slightly toward me, but Olivia nodded. "Yes," she said, "we did." That should have been a good moment. It should have been the moment leadership finally saw the truth. Instead, it made Richard more careful and more dangerous. After the meeting, Victoria stopped me in the hallway. "Natalie," she said. I turned. "That was solid work." 2 words. Solid work. It was the first direct praise I had received from her. Before I could respond, Richard appeared beside us. "She's been very helpful," he said quickly. "I've been working closely with her on sharpening the client details." Victoria nodded, already looking at her phone. "Good. Keep it up." Then she walked away. Richard's smile faded the moment she was gone. He turned to me. "My office." It was not a request. I followed him. He closed the door behind us. For a few seconds, he said nothing. He walked to his desk, placed his portfolio down, and looked out the window as if he were trying to control his temper. Then he turned around. "You need to be more careful in executive meetings." I blinked. "Careful?" "Yes." I answered the client's questions. "You contradicted the tone I was setting." I stared at him. "The tone you were setting was missing half the facts." His eyes sharpened. "That is exactly what I mean." I felt my pulse rise. "Richard, Olivia asked for the person who built the recovery map. She asked for me. And you enjoyed that, didn't you?" The accusation was so sudden that for a moment I didn't understand it. "What?" "You enjoyed making me look unprepared." I almost laughed but stopped myself. "You were unprepared." His face changed. There it was. The real Richard. Not the polished director, not the supportive mentor, not the man who said team effort in meetings and support work in hallways. The man underneath, cold, threatened, angry. He leaned forward, both hands on his desk. "Let me explain something to you, Natalie. Clients do not run this company. Senior leadership does not need to see every internal contribution. And you do not build your career by making your director look bad in front of the COO. I felt the fear rise automatically. That old corporate fear, the fear of being labeled difficult, emotional, not leadership material, too aggressive, not collaborative. I had carried that fear for years, and Richard knew exactly where to press. But this time, beneath the fear, there was something else. Anger. Clean and hot. I built the recovery map, I said. Richard stood straight. You built components of a department initiative. No, I built the framework. Under my leadership, with no guidance from you. His jaw tightened. Careful. One word, softly spoken, but it landed like a warning shot. I looked at him and realized he was not trying to correct me. He was trying to train me, to sit down, to be grateful, to keep working, to let him stand in front. A month earlier, it might have worked. That day, it almost did. Almost. Richard walked around the desk and lowered his voice. Natalie, you're talented. I've never denied that. But talent without judgment can become a problem. I said nothing. You're good with details. You're good with clients. You're very good at execution. Execution. There it was, the smaller box he wanted to put me in. But leadership, he continued, requires presence, strategy, authority. You're not there yet. I looked at him. For 11 months, I had been creating strategy. For 11 months, he had been forwarding it upward. For 11 months, my so-called lack of leadership had been saving his department. And now he was using the word like a locked door. I asked quietly, and you are? His expression went flat. That attitude will hurt you. No, I said. Trusting you hurt me. For the first time, Richard looked genuinely surprised. The room became very quiet. Then he smiled, not warmly, professionally. The kind of smile people wear when they're deciding how to punish you later. I think you should take the afternoon, he said. I have client follow-ups. I'll reassign them. To who? He opened his laptop. I'll decide. I stood there for a moment, understanding exactly what was happening. He was not just taking credit anymore. He was taking access, client by client, meeting by meeting. He wanted to separate me from the relationships I had built, then tell everyone I had never owned them in the first place. I walked back to my desk with my face calm and my hands cold. Maya saw me immediately. Bad? I sat down. He's reassigning my client follow-ups. Her eyes widened. What? He said I need to take the afternoon. Maya rolled her chair closer. Natalie, this is retaliation. I know. The words surprised both of us because this time I did know. I was not confused anymore. I was not explaining it away. I was not telling myself that corporate politics were just complicated. Richard was trying to erase me, and if I wanted to survive it, I needed more than feelings. I needed proof. That afternoon, I did not go home. I stayed at my desk. I opened every Meridian folder, every draft, every spreadsheet, every client note, every email thread. I downloaded nothing I was not allowed to access. I copied nothing from restricted systems. I did not take client data out of the company database, but I created a record, a timeline, dates, requests, files, meeting invites before and after my removal. Emails where Richard asked me for talking points. Emails where I sent him recommendations based on my client calls. Version histories showing original authorship. Client messages addressed directly to me. Feedback from Olivia. Questions from Ellison. North Star's thanks after I stabilized their account team. I organized everything into one private document titled, Not Dramatic, Not Emotional, Boring. Written, impossible to deny. Maya helped me after hours. We sat side by side in the half-empty office while the sky outside turned dark. She pulled reporting logs. I checked email chains. She found timestamps. I matched them with meeting dates. At 8:36 p.m., she leaned back in her chair and whispered, "He's been planning this." I looked at her. She turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was a file history log from the shared drive. 3 weeks earlier, Richard had duplicated the Meridian master deck and renamed it. Then, over several edits, he had removed the appendix containing my research notes, removed my name from the title page, removed the authorship section, removed the call summary references. By the final version, there was no trace of me. I stared at the screen. It was one thing to suspect someone was stealing from you. It was another thing to watch the theft happen in timestamps. Maya's voice was quiet. "I'm sorry," I shook my head. "No." My voice sounded different, calmer than I felt. "Don't be sorry." I took a screenshot of the file history, then saved the link to the internal audit trail. Maya watched me. "What are you going to do with all this?" I looked at the growing timeline. A month earlier, I might have said I was going to HR, but by then I knew better. HR would ask Richard for his side. Richard would say it was a misunderstanding. Leadership would say contributions are hard to define. Someone would advise me to focus on teamwork. Then Richard would become more careful, and I would become the problem. No, I needed to wait. Not forever. Just long enough for Richard to believe he had won. Because men like Richard always made the same mistake. Once they believed they owned the room, they stopped checking the exits. 2 days later, I received another calendar update. This time, it was for the Ellison Foods renewal meeting. I had been removed again, then North Star, then the Internal Meridian Steering Committee, then the executive prep session with Victoria. One by one, my name disappeared from the rooms where my work was being discussed. But the requests kept coming. Richard still needed the numbers, the risk scores, the client history, the talking points, the recovery plans. He still sent messages like every time I answered professionally, every time I documented it, and every time he stepped into a room without me, he carried another piece of my work like it belonged to him. The company started talking about Meridian more and more. People called it Richard's big win, Richard's transformation strategy, Richard's leadership moment. I heard the phrases in hallways, saw them in Slack messages, read them in executive updates. Each time something inside me hardened. Not because I wanted applause, not anymore. I wanted accuracy. I wanted the record to show the truth. And if Brightline refused to see it while I was in the building, then maybe they would see it after I was gone. The final insult came on a Friday afternoon. Richard sent me a message. Attached was the deck. I opened it. The title slide read, "Prepared by my name was nowhere, not in the appendix, not in the notes, not in the acknowledgements, not even under team contributors." I sat there staring at the screen while the office moved around me. People packing bags, weekend plans, elevator doors opening and closing, someone nearby laughing about dinner reservations. The world kept moving as if nothing had happened. I clicked through the deck, my charts, my models, my phrasing, my client language, my strategy, his name. By then, I did not feel shock. I felt clarity, a terrible, perfect clarity. Richard had not misunderstood. He had not forgotten. He had not accidentally failed to credit me. He had made a decision. So I made one too. I opened the file. I corrected the formatting. I cleaned the charts. I fixed 3 errors Richard had introduced because he did not understand the data. Then I sent it back with an email. I copied no one. Not yet. But I saved the email. Then I opened my Meridian contribution timeline and added the final entry. I read the sentence once. Then I closed the document. On Monday, Richard would present my work to the board. He would smile. He would accept praise. He would probably get exactly what he wanted. And for the first time, I was ready to let him. Because I was beginning to understand something Richard had never considered. When someone steals your work, sometimes the smartest move is not to stop them at the door. Sometimes you let them walk all the way onto the stage. You let the lights come on. You let the audience applaud. You let them claim they built the machine. And then when the machine breaks, you let everyone watch them try to explain why they do not know how it works. By Monday morning, the whole office felt different. Not because anyone had said anything official yet. Corporate news has a way of leaking before it is announced. It travels through calendar holds, closed-door meetings, sudden smiles from executives, and the strange silence that falls over people who know something but are pretending they do not. By 8:30 a.m., everyone at Brightline Analytics knew Richard Blake was going to be promoted. No email had gone out. No announcement had been made, but people knew. I saw it in the way directors stopped by his office with congratulations disguised as casual conversation. I saw it in the way Richard's assistant brought him coffee in a real ceramic mug instead of the paper cups everyone else used. I saw it in the way Victoria Hayes walked past my desk without looking at me, then went straight into Richard's office and closed the door. Maya rolled her chair over to my desk at 8:46. "You heard?" she asked. I kept my eyes on my monitor. "He's getting VP." She nodded slowly. Apparently the board loved the Meridian presentation. Of course they did. It had been designed to impress them. The charts were clean, the language was sharp, the client risks looked controlled, the recovery plans sounded confident, the financial projections were conservative enough to look responsible, but optimistic enough to look like leadership. It was good work. That was the worst part. It was very good work, and Richard had presented it as if he had built every piece of it himself. Maya lowered her voice. Natalie, you don't have to sit through the announcement. Yes, I do. No, you really don't. I finally looked at her. Yes, I said quietly. I do. She studied my face. Why? Because I wanted to remember it. That was the answer I did not say out loud. I wanted to remember the exact moment Brightline rewarded a lie. I wanted to remember every person who clapped, every executive who smiled, every polished sentence used to turn theft into leadership. Not because I wanted to punish all of them, because I never wanted to forget what the company had chosen to value. At 10 a.m., the all-hands meeting began. The entire client growth department gathered in the large event space near the west windows. There were folding chairs, branded banners, a small stage, and 2 screens showing the Brightline logo. It looked like every other corporate celebration. Too bright, too cheerful, too expensive for a company that constantly told employees there was no budget for raises. People filled the chairs around me, talking quietly. Someone behind me whispered, "This has to be about Richard." Someone else said, "Honestly, Meridian was huge. He deserves it." I sat very still. Maya sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. "You okay?" she whispered. "No." She nodded. "Good. That would be weird if you were." At 10:04, Victoria Hayes walked onto the stage. The room quieted. Victoria was not a warm speaker. She did not waste words or smile unless there was a strategic reason for it. That was part of why people respected her. When Victoria praised someone, it meant something. That morning, she stood beneath the Brightline logo and looked out at us with the satisfied expression of a leader delivering good news. "Thank you all for joining on short notice," she began. "Over the past several months, our enterprise client strategy has gone through a significant transformation." My stomach tightened. Project Meridian has not only stabilized several high-risk accounts, but also created a repeatable framework for how Brightline can rebuild trust with our most important partners. A repeatable framework. My framework. Victoria continued. "This kind of work requires vision, discipline, and leadership." Maya's hand tightened around her coffee cup. I stared at the stage. "And today," Victoria said, "I'm pleased to announce that Richard Blake has been promoted to Vice President of Client Growth." The room broke into applause. Loud, immediate, automatic. People stood up. Richard walked to the stage with his modest smile already in place, like a man pretending to be surprised by something he had rehearsed in the mirror. He shook Victoria's hand. She leaned toward him and said something too low for the microphone to catch. Richard laughed softly. Then he turned to face us. For 1 second, his eyes passed over the room and landed on me. Just for 1 second. He saw me. I know he did. Then he looked away and smiled wider. "Thank you, Victoria," he said into the microphone, "and thank you, everyone." The applause faded. Richard placed one hand over his chest. "I'm honored, truly." Maya muttered under her breath, "Here we go." Richard continued. "When I first began thinking about what became Project Meridian, I knew we couldn't approach client retention the old way. We couldn't just react. We had to lead." I felt my jaw tighten. He was not just taking credit. He was giving an origin story, a false one. "I believed from the beginning that our clients didn't just need better service," Richard said. "They needed restored confidence. They needed trust, and that required a new framework." He paused. People were listening. Some were nodding. That was the thing about Richard. He knew how to make theft sound like wisdom. "I'm proud of what I led," he said. "But more than that, I'm proud of what this team accomplished under pressure. This team, not Natalie, not Maya, not the analysts who had pulled emergency data, not the client success managers who had cleaned up years of broken handoffs, just a vague, generous team that cost him nothing." He looked across the room again. "This promotion is not just about me," he said. Then he smiled. "It's about what happens when vision becomes execution." I almost laughed. Vision. His favorite word for other people's labor. Execution. His favorite word for the people doing it. The meeting ended with more applause, a few photos, and a brief speech from the CEO, who had flown in from New York for the board review and clearly had no idea who I was. Afterward, people formed a line to congratulate Richard. I watched them shake his hand. Some clapped him on the shoulder. Some told him they had always known he was headed for executive leadership. One woman from sales said, "Meridian changed everything. You must be proud." Richard smiled and said, It was a lot of work, but worth it. I felt Maya shift beside me. "Say the word," she whispered. "What word?" "Any word. I'll start a fire." Despite myself, I almost smiled, but then someone turned toward me. It was Aaron from Product, a man who had ignored every warning I had sent about Grantwell's broken dashboard until Olivia Grant threatened to walk. He grinned and said, "Natalie, you must be proud too. I mean, you helped Richard a lot on this, right?" Helped. The word landed like a slap. I looked at him. He meant no harm. That almost made it worse. He had absorbed the story Brightline had given him. Richard was the leader. I was the helper. My entire year had been reduced to a footnote in someone else's promotion. Maya answered before I could. "She did more than help." Aaron blinked. "Oh, sure, I just meant—" "I know what you meant," Maya said. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough that Aaron's smile faded. I touched her arm lightly. "Don't." She looked at me. I shook my head. "Not here. Not like this." Richard noticed the exchange from across the room. His expression did not change, but I saw the calculation in his eyes. 5 minutes later, I received a message. I showed Maya the screen. Her face went cold. "Want me to come?" "No, Natalie. I need to hear what he says." She understood immediately, because by then, every conversation mattered. Every word, every threat, every careful little lie. Richard's new office was not actually new yet. The VP title had been announced, but facilities had not moved him to the executive floor. Still, someone had already placed a small congratulatory gift basket on his desk. Dark chocolate, a bottle of sparkling water, a card that said, "I stood in the doorway and looked at it." Richard was behind his desk removing his suit jacket. "Close the door," he said. I did. He gestured toward the chair. I remained standing. His eyes flicked to my posture, then back to my face. "I wanted to check in," he said. "No, you didn't." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Excuse me. You wanted to control the situation." For a moment, silence. Then he smiled. It was the same smile he used in meetings when someone said something inconvenient but not yet dangerous. "Natalie, today is a big day. Emotions are naturally high." "You keep saying that because it's true." "No," I said. "You say it because it makes any objection sound irrational before I even make it." His smile faded. I felt afraid, but I also felt awake. Richard sat down slowly. "I think you need to be very careful with your tone." "There it is. There what is? The warning." He leaned back. "This is not a warning. It's advice." "From my director? From your vice president?" The words hung between us. He wanted me to feel the new title, to feel the weight of it, to understand that the imbalance between us had just become official. I looked at the gift basket on his desk. "Well," I said, "congratulations." His eyes narrowed. "Natalie, what do you want from me, Richard?" He sighed, as if I were exhausting him. "I want you to be professional. I have been professional. Then act like it." That one hurt more than I expected, because for nearly a year, professionalism had been the cage I built around myself. I had been professional when he removed my name, professional when he took my meetings, professional when he presented my work, professional when he called me support, professional when everyone clapped for him. Professionalism had not protected me. It had protected him. Richard folded his hands on the desk. "I know this promotion may feel complicated for you." "Complicated?" "Yes. You stole my project." He stared at me. For the first time, I had said it plainly. No corporate language, no softened edges, no visibility concern, no credit misalignment, just the truth. "You stole my project." Richard's expression became very still. "That is a serious accusation. It's a serious thing to do. You need to think carefully about where you want this conversation to go." "I have. Have you?" His voice lowered. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're a strong employee having an emotional reaction to a leadership decision you don't fully understand." There it was, the whole strategy. Reduce my facts to feelings, reduce my work to support, reduce his theft to structure. I looked at him and said, "Project Meridian was my framework. Project Meridian was developed under my department. I built the client risk model. Under my direction, I created the recovery maps as part of your role. I handled the client conversations and reported them to me. I wrote the executive strategy. You contributed to it." The speed of his answers told me something important. He had rehearsed this, maybe not in front of a mirror, maybe not word for word, but in his mind, he had built the defense long before I confronted him. Richard leaned forward. "Natalie, let me be clear. You are talented, but you are not ready for executive ownership. I almost smiled. That phrase, executive ownership, another polished name for taking what someone else built. You're good at details, he continued. You're excellent with client nuance, but leadership requires broader vision. I tilted my head. Is that what you call changing the name on a slide? His face hardened. Enough. The word cracked through the office. For a second, I saw it again. The real Richard. Not charming, not polished, not patient, just a man furious that the person he had stepped on had spoken. He took a breath and adjusted his tone. I don't want this to affect your future here. My future here. Yes. What future? He frowned. You have opportunities. Doing what? Building the next project you can rename. His mouth tightened. You're making this personal. It is personal. That's your mistake. No, I said. My mistake was believing it wasn't. He stood. Natalie, if you continue down this path, you will damage your reputation. People will see you as bitter, territorial, unable to celebrate team success. There they were. The words I had feared for years. Bitter, territorial, not a team player. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was not arguing with the evidence. He was threatening the version of me that existed in other people's minds. And for a moment, it worked. A small, familiar panic moved through my chest. What if he was right? What if I spoke up and everyone decided I was jealous? What if they said I misunderstood how leadership works? What if Richard had already told the story so many times that mine sounded like revenge? Then I thought of Olivia Grant looking directly at me and saying, "That is the first clear explanation I've heard from Brightline in 6 months." I thought of Maya saying, "Make the truth boring, written and impossible to deny." I thought of my name disappearing from the deck one version at a time, and the panic passed. Not completely, but enough. I looked at Richard. You won. His expression shifted. He had not expected that. What? You got the promotion. You got the applause. You got your name on the deck. You got exactly what you wanted. He said nothing. I continued. So you shouldn't need me anymore. Something flickered across his face. There. Fear. Small, quick, and gone almost instantly. But I saw it. Natalie, don't be dramatic. I'm not. Good. Then we can move forward. No, I said. You can. He stared at me. I reached into the folder I was carrying and took out a single printed page. My resignation letter. I had written it after the all-hands meeting before he summoned me. Not because I was impulsive. Not because I was emotional. Because the moment I watched the room applaud him, I understood that Brightline would not protect me while I was useful to him. So I would stop being useful. I placed the letter on his desk. Richard looked down at it, then back at me. What is this? My notice. For the first time all day he looked truly unprepared. You're resigning? Yes. He picked up the paper as if it might say something different if he held it closer. This is ridiculous. No, it's precise. Natalie, sit down. No. His eyes flashed. You are making a career-limiting mistake. I almost laughed. Whose career? Whose career? He stood completely still. I continued. You told me I'm not ready for executive ownership. You told me Meridian was yours. You told everyone you led it, so there should be no problem when I leave. Richard's mouth opened, then closed, because we both knew there would be a problem. He did not understand Grantwell. He did not understand Ellison. He did not understand North Star. He did not understand why Olivia hated vague timelines, why Marcus Ellison distrusted optimistic projections, why Dana Kim needed continuity more than discounts. He knew the slides, but he did not know the relationships. And for the first time, he understood the difference. His tone changed. Natalie? Softer now, almost kind. That was when I knew I had made the right decision. Natalie, let's not overreact. I'm not overreacting. Take the day, think about it. I already have. We can discuss your growth path. I looked at him. My growth path? Yes, there may be ways to give you more visibility. Visibility. After stealing the room, he was offering me a window. I shook my head. I don't want visibility from you. His expression darkened again. You understand that if you leave now, the transition needs to be clean. It will be. I expect full documentation. You have it. I expect client notes, renewal status, risk summaries, all in the system. And relationship context. I paused. That was the first honest thing he had said. Not because he cared about a clean transition, because he knew the relationship context was the part he could not fake. I said, I'll document everything required for transition. His eyes held mine. Everything required? Yes. His jaw tightened. You're still an employee for 2 weeks. I know, and I expect professionalism. You'll get exactly that. I turned toward the door. Natalie? I stopped. Richard's voice was low. You don't want to make an enemy of me. For a second, I stood completely still. There it was. Not advice, not mentorship, not leadership, a threat. I turned back. No, Richard, I said quietly. You don't want to make a liability of yourself. His face went pale with anger. I opened the door and walked out. Maya stood up the moment she saw me. She did not ask what happened. She looked at my face, then at the folder in my hand and understood. You did it. I sat down at my desk. Yes. She came closer. How much notice? 2 weeks. Are you okay? I looked at my computer screen. My inbox already had a message from Richard. I opened it. Then I sent it. Maya read over my shoulder and whispered, That is ice cold. No, I said. It's accurate. By noon, HR had acknowledged my resignation. By 1 p.m., Richard had stopped by my desk twice, each time pretending to need something. By 2:15, Victoria Hayes forwarded my resignation notice to herself and requested a transition alignment meeting. By 3, 3 people from client success had heard rumors and were staring at me like I had announced I was moving to another planet. At 4:22, Olivia Grant emailed me directly. I stared at the message. For a long moment, I did not move. Maya leaned over. What is it? I turned the screen slightly. She read it. Her eyebrows lifted. Oh, I knew I had to be careful. I was still employed by Brightline. I could not take client data. I could not solicit clients. I could not create chaos on purpose. But I could tell the truth, professionally, cleanly. I replied. I read it 3 times before sending. No emotion, no accusation, no invitation, just fact. Olivia replied 12 minutes later. I stared at the last sentence. Who will be responsible for maintaining the same level of account understanding? That was the question Richard should have been afraid of. I forwarded the email to Richard and Victoria with 1 sentence. Richard did not reply. Victoria did. I leaned back in my chair. Across the office, Richard was standing in his doorway, phone in hand, staring at me. For months, he had removed my name from rooms. Now my absence had entered the rooms before he could control it. The next morning, the transition meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Richard, Victoria, HR, Maya, and I sat around the same conference table where Meridian had first been discussed months earlier. There was an irony in that. Victoria opened the meeting. Natalie, first, we're sorry to see you go. Richard stared at his laptop. HR smiled with the careful neutrality of someone paid not to react. Victoria continued. We want to ensure a smooth transition, especially given the importance of the Meridian accounts. I nodded. I've prepared transition documentation. Richard looked up. All of it? I met his eyes. Yes. I placed 3 folders on the table, 1 for Grantwell, 1 for Ellison, 1 for Northstar. Each contained action items, renewal dates, system locations, open issues, and summaries of client concerns. Everything required, nothing extra. Victoria opened the Grantwell folder. This is thorough. Thank you. Richard flipped through his copy quickly. His face tightened. Where are the relationship maps? In the system, I said. I don't see the full context here. The transition documents include current action items and account status. I need the strategic context. I looked at him. The strategic context is contained in the Meridian framework. His eyes narrowed. The framework you helped build. The framework I built, I said calmly. HR looked up. Victoria stopped turning pages. The room became very quiet. Richard smiled tightly. This again. Victoria looked at me. Natalie, is there a concern we need to be aware of? There it was, the opening. The moment I had imagined for weeks. I could have opened the timeline right there. I could have shown every email, every version history, every meeting removal, every request. But I looked at Richard and understood something. He wanted me to explode. He wanted me emotional. He wanted HR to see a bitter employee making accusations after a promotion. So I did not give him that. I smiled politely. Yes, I said, but not one I'm prepared to discuss without the full documentation present. Victoria's expression changed, just slightly. Richard's smile faded. HR straightened. Maya looked down at the table to hide her expression. Victoria closed the folder. Then please send me the documentation. I will, Richard said quickly. Victoria, I really don't think. She raised one hand. He stopped. That was the first time I had seen her silence him. It was small, but I noticed. After the meeting, Maya followed me to the elevator. "That was perfect," she whispered. "No," I said. "It was necessary." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. Before the doors closed, I saw Richard at the end of the hallway speaking urgently to Victoria. For the first time, she was not nodding. She was listening, carefully, suspiciously. And Richard looked exactly like a man who had just realized that a stolen promotion can become evidence if the person you stole from kept receipts. That afternoon, I sent Victoria a short email. I did not attach anything yet. I wanted the process in writing. 4 minutes later, Victoria replied. I read the message twice. Then I opened the Meridian contribution timeline. For months, I had written it quietly. Now it was ready to speak, but before I could send it, another email arrived. This one was from Olivia Grant. Subject: she had copied Victoria. The message was brief, professional, devastating. I sat there reading it, not smiling, not celebrating, just understanding the shift. Richard had taken my name off the slides, but he could not take my name out of the client's memory. By the end of that day, Ellison Foods had also asked who would replace me. Northstar requested a continuity plan. Victoria scheduled a follow-up meeting with Richard for first thing the next morning. And I sent the Meridian contribution timeline to HR, legal, and Victoria. No dramatic subject line. No angry introduction. Just this. Then I shut down my laptop and packed my bag. As I walked toward the elevators, I passed Richard's office. His door was closed. The blinds were drawn. For the first time since I had known him, he did not look like a rising executive. He looked like a man trapped inside a story he had written too confidently. And I was no longer standing outside the glass watching him tell it. I was walking out of the building with the truth behind me. And the clients were already asking why. For the first 24 hours after I sent the Meridian contribution timeline, Brightline became very quiet around me. Not the normal kind of office quiet. This was different. This was the kind of quiet that happens when people know something has shifted, but no one is ready to say it out loud. Richard did not stop by my desk that morning. He did not send his usual messages asking for numbers he should already know. He did not forward me client questions with the words "au revoir." For the first time in months, he left me alone, and somehow that felt louder than anything he could have said. Maya noticed it too. At 9:17 a.m., she rolled her chair over with a coffee in one hand and a protein bar in the other. "You've become a weather event," she said. I looked up from my transition checklist. "What?" She nodded toward the row of offices along the windows. "Everyone in leadership is acting like there's a storm coming, but no one knows if they're supposed to evacuate or pretend it's sunny." I followed her gaze. Victoria's office door was closed. HR's office door was closed. Richard's office door was closed. 3 closed doors in a row. "That seems dramatic," I said. Maya handed me the protein bar. "You resigned, submitted a documented authorship timeline, and 3 enterprise clients started asking why you're leaving. Dramatic is no longer the problem. Dramatic is the weather." I almost smiled. Almost. But the truth was, I felt strange. Not happy. Not powerful. Not satisfied in the way people imagine revenge feels. I mostly felt tired. For months I had carried Meridian like a second spine. Every number, every client fear, every fragile repair in those relationships had lived somewhere in my head. Now that I had decided to leave, I expected to feel free. Instead, I felt like I was setting down something heavy and watching everyone else realize they did not know how to lift it. At 10:03 a.m., Victoria's assistant scheduled a meeting titled Attendees: Victoria Hayes, Richard Blake, HR Legal, Maya Collins, and me. Duration: 1 hour. Location: Conference Room B. I stared at the invite. Maya leaned over. "Well," she said, "that sounds fun." "It sounds like a funeral with Wi-Fi," she snorted. At 10:27, Richard finally messaged me. I read it once, then again, all current client context. That was exactly the phrase he had avoided when he wanted credit. Now that consequences were arriving, suddenly context mattered. I replied. He responded almost immediately. I let the message sit for a full minute before answering. No accusation, no sarcasm, no emotion. Just walls. Professional walls. The kind Richard had spent months hiding behind. Now I used them too. At 11, we gathered in Conference Room B. Victoria sat at the head of the table with a printed copy of my timeline in front of her. I knew because I could see the highlighted sections. Richard sat to her right, jaw tight, laptop open, fingers resting on the keyboard but not typing. HR sat beside legal. Maya sat beside me. No one smiled. Victoria began. Thank you for joining. The goal today is to ensure continuity for key Meridian accounts following Natalie's departure. Richard leaned forward immediately. I agree, and I want to be very clear that we have the documentation needed. My concern is that Natalie's transition materials are not capturing the full relationship nuance required. I looked at him. Relationship nuance. That was rich. For months, nuance had been the thing he edited out of my decks because it made the story harder to sell upward. Victoria turned to me. Natalie, can you walk us through what you've prepared? Yes. I opened my folder. For each account, I prepared a transition packet containing current account status, renewal timeline, open action items, recent escalation history, primary contacts, system locations for detailed notes, and recommended next steps. I slid the packets forward. Grantwell is the highest risk if the transition is mishandled. Olivia Grant has repeatedly emphasized accountability and continuity. Ellison is sensitive to inflated projections and will likely push back on any optimistic model without conservative assumptions. Northstar's main concern is instability. They have had too many internal Brightline owners and will interpret another handoff as a risk unless the transition is structured carefully. Victoria took notes. Richard interrupted. That's a good summary, but again, that doesn't replace lived context. I turned to him. No, it doesn't. The room went still. Richard looked momentarily pleased, as if he thought I had conceded something. Then I continued. That is why I recommended months ago that more than one person be included in client strategy calls. When account understanding sits with one employee, the company creates transition risk. Maya looked down at her notebook. I could tell she was trying not to smile. Victoria looked at Richard. Were others included in those calls? Richard cleared his throat. When appropriate. I said nothing. Victoria looked back at me. Natalie? Initially, yes. Over time, I was removed from several executive client meetings, but continued to prepare the materials and respond to follow-up questions. Richard's head snapped toward me. That is not a fair characterization. I opened my folder and placed a printed page on the table. This is the meeting attendance timeline. It shows the original invites, updated invites, and related requests for prep materials after removal. Legal leaned forward. HR picked up a copy. Richard stared at the page like it had personally betrayed him. Victoria did not speak for several seconds. Then she said, "Let's stay focused on continuity." That was when I knew she had seen enough to understand. Maybe not everything, but enough. The meeting continued for nearly an hour. We discussed Grantwell first. Richard tried to explain the account, but he kept speaking in generalities. They care about accuracy. They want stronger communication. They need confidence in the platform. All true, all useless. Victoria finally asked, what specific operational failure triggered Olivia's loss of confidence? Richard hesitated. I knew the answer instantly. The weekend sync failures, the Monday inventory reports, the Midwest regional variance, the executive embarrassment Olivia had suffered when her own team used Brightline data in a board meeting and had to correct it 2 days later. Richard looked at his laptop. The reporting issue was broad, he said. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Natalie? I answered calmly. The immediate trigger was the Q2 weekend sync failure that affected Monday inventory projections. The highest variance was in the Midwest region. Olivia's concern was not just the error itself, but that Brightline took 9 business days to acknowledge operational impact. Victoria wrote that down. Richard's face tightened. Then came Ellison. Victoria asked, why did Marcus Ellison reject the first renewal proposal? Richard said he wanted stronger ROI justification. Again true, again incomplete. I said Marcus rejected it because the model assumed adoption rates his finance team considered unrealistic. He specifically objected to the 18-month payback period because it ignored seasonal margin compression. I rebuilt the model with conservative 3-year assumptions. Victoria looked at Richard. Were you aware of that? Richard said at a high level. Maya shifted beside me. Then came Northstar. Victoria asked, what is their biggest concern? Richard answered quickly, service responsiveness. I closed my eyes for half a second. Wrong. Not completely wrong, but wrong enough to be dangerous. Victoria turned to me. Natalie, continuity, I said. They've had 7 different Brightline account owners in 18 months. Their concern is not just whether we respond, it's whether anyone remembers what was already promised. Silence. That was the moment the room finally understood the shape of the problem. Richard had memorized the labels. I understood the wounds. After the meeting, Victoria asked me to stay back. Richard's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood. He looked at me, then at Victoria. I'd like to be included in any discussion about my department. Victoria did not look up from the documents. This is a transition follow-up. Richard's face flushed. I'm the VP of Client Growth. Victoria finally looked at him. I'm aware. 2 words. Cold, flat, final. Richard left the room. Maya followed, but not before giving me a look that said everything. Victoria waited until the door closed. Then she removed her glasses and placed them on the table. Natalie, she said, I'm going to ask you a direct question. I folded my hands in front of me. Okay. Did Richard present your work to leadership without properly crediting you? There it was. The question I had wanted for months, and now that it had arrived, I felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Yes, I said. Victoria's expression did not change. For how long? Since Meridian started showing results. She looked down at the timeline. You documented this extensively. Maya advised me to. Victoria glanced toward the door. She was right. I did not respond. Victoria leaned back. Why didn't you bring this to me sooner? I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, because that question is always asked by people who had the power to notice but did not. Instead, I answered honestly. Because Richard controlled my access to leadership. Because every time I raised concerns, he reframed them as emotional. Because I was afraid of being seen as difficult. And because until clients started asking for me by name, I don't think anyone would have believed me. Victoria was silent. For the first time since I had known her, she looked uncomfortable. Not guilty exactly, but close. Finally, she said, that is difficult to hear. It was difficult to live. She nodded once. I understand why you resigned. I stood. Thank you. As I reached for my folder, she said, would you consider staying if we created a formal role around strategic accounts? I paused. There it was. The offer. Not official yet, but real enough to hear. A title, a correction, a door opening after I had already turned away. A month earlier, those words might have changed everything. But now they felt late. Very late. I looked at Victoria. Would that role exist if I hadn't resigned? She did not answer. That was answer enough. I nodded. I'll complete the transition professionally, but I'm still leaving. Victoria studied me for a long moment. Then she said, I'm sorry we didn't recognize this sooner. I wanted to say instead, I said, so am I. By the afternoon, things began unraveling faster. At 1:14 p.m., Olivia Grant requested a call with Victoria. At 1:32, Marcus Ellison emailed Richard and copied Victoria asking who had rebuilt the conservative renewal model and whether that person would still be involved in the next review. At 2:08, Dana Kim from Northstar wrote, Knowledge Reset. That phrase spread through Brightline like smoke. By 3, people were whispering. By 3:30, Richard had stopped coming out of his office. By 4, Victoria canceled 2 meetings and scheduled an emergency Meridian client strategy review for the next morning. I was not invited at first. Then, 8 minutes later, the invite updated. My name appeared. Maya looked over at me. They added you? Yes. She raised an eyebrow. Senior level enough now? I gave her a tired smile. Apparently. The next morning, the emergency review began with Richard attempting to regain control. He stood at the front of the room with a revised deck titled, this time, my name was on the second slide under Transition Support. Not Project Lead, not Strategy Owner. Transition Support. Even in crisis, Richard could not help himself. Victoria noticed. Her eyes paused on the slide for half a second. So did Legal's. So did Maya's. Richard began. As we manage Natalie's departure, the priority is reassuring clients that the Meridian framework is institutional, not dependent on any one person. A reasonable sentence. A dangerous lie. He clicked to the next slide. The client relationships are fully documented, and my team is prepared to continue execution. Victoria interrupted. Which team members will own each account? Richard clicked again. Grantwell will stay under my direct oversight. Ellison will move to client success with support from finance. Northstar will have a rotating coverage model until we assign a permanent owner. I felt my stomach drop. Rotating coverage for Northstar, the client whose biggest fear was instability. Victoria looked at me. Natalie? I took a breath. I would not recommend rotating coverage for Northstar. Richard's jaw tightened. Victoria said, "Why?" "Because the last 18 months of rotating ownership are exactly why they are at risk. If Brightline assigns temporary rotating coverage, Dana Kim will interpret that as confirmation that nothing has changed." Richard said, "We can explain that it's temporary." "She won't care that it's temporary. She'll care that it's familiar." The room went quiet. Victoria looked at Richard. "Adjust the plan." Richard's face reddened slightly. "Of course." He moved to the next slide. "For Grantwell, I'll personally lead the next executive call." I said nothing. Victoria looked at me again. "Concern?" I hated that she was asking now. I hated that after all those months outside the room, my opinion had suddenly become necessary because the damage had reached the executive level. Still, I answered, "Olivia does not want performance theater. She wants ownership. If Richard leads the call, he needs to acknowledge specific failures and avoid broad confidence language." Richard gave a short laugh. "Performance theater?" I looked at him. "Yes." His smile froze. Victoria asked, "What does that mean in practice?" "It means no phrases like 'we're committed to excellence' unless they are tied to a measurable correction. Olivia will reject vague reassurance. She wants specific accountability, dates, owners, and proof that Brightline understands the damage caused." Legal wrote something down. Richard said, "I understand, Olivia." I did not respond. Victoria watched him. "Then you should be able to answer her questions without Natalie feeding you information during the call." The sentence landed hard. Richard went still. Maya's pen stopped moving. No one spoke. Richard's voice was controlled. "I don't think that characterization is necessary." Victoria looked at the printed emails in front of her. "I think it's accurate." That was the first public crack. The first time someone above Richard said in a room with witnesses that his version of leadership did not match the record. He knew it too. For the rest of the meeting, Richard spoke less. Victoria directed more questions to me. Legal asked where records were stored. HR asked whether my transition documentation had been limited by Richard's reassignment of duties. Maya provided data logs. By the end, the story had changed. Not officially, not yet, but enough. Richard was no longer the unquestioned leader of Meridian. He was becoming the problem Meridian had exposed. That afternoon, Richard came to my desk. For the first time since his promotion, he did not summon me to his office. He came to me. "Natalie," he said quietly. Maya stood from her desk 3 rows away. Richard noticed. His mouth tightened. "I just want to talk." I turned in my chair. "About what?" He lowered his voice. "About how we move forward." "We," he swallowed. "I know this has been tense." "Tense?" "Yes." I waited. He glanced around the office, then said, "Look, if there were moments where you felt undercredited, I regret that. Undercredited. Not erased. Not exploited. Not stolen from. Undercredited." The man could not tell the truth even when it was standing in front of him. I said, "That's not an apology." His face stiffened. "It's an attempt to de-escalate." "No, it's an attempt to protect yourself." He leaned closer. "You need to think carefully about how this plays out. You may feel supported right now because clients are asking questions, but companies have long memories." I looked at him. "So do audit trails." His eyes flashed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled faintly. "You think you've won?" "No," I said. "I think you're finally being asked to do the job you claimed you already did." His smile disappeared. "You have no idea how much damage you're causing." I stood. That made him take half a step back. "I didn't cause this damage, Richard. I documented it." He stared at me. Behind him, a few people had gone quiet. I kept my voice low. "You wanted Meridian. You wanted the title. You wanted the room. Now you have all of it. So lead." He said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that would not expose him further. He turned and walked away. By the end of that week, Grantwell postponed renewal discussions. Ellison requested a revised financial review. Northstar formally paused expansion planning. Brightline did not lose them immediately. That would have been too simple. Instead, something worse happened. They stopped trusting the story. Every call became harder, every question became sharper, every reassurance needed proof. And the more Richard tried to sound like the architect of Meridian, the more obvious it became that he only knew the building from the outside. On my second to last day, Olivia Grant called me directly. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Natalie Warren. Natalie, it's Olivia. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the edge underneath. Hi, Olivia. I know you're transitioning out, and I won't ask anything inappropriate. I appreciate that. I just want to say something clearly. I sat back. Okay. She paused. You were the reason I stayed in the conversation with Brightline. My throat tightened. Olivia continued. I don't say that lightly. Your company made mistakes, serious ones, but you never insulted me by pretending they didn't happen. I looked out the window at the city below. For what it's worth, I said, I'm sorry the transition is happening this way. So am I, Olivia said, but I hope you understand something. What? Trust follows people more often than companies want to admit. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. The truth Richard had missed. Brightline owned the contracts. Brightline owned the platform. Brightline owned the CRM, the dashboards, the servers, the slide decks, the data systems. But trust did not live in a system. Trust lived in repeated conversations, in answered calls, in telling a client the truth when a lie would be easier, in remembering the detail everyone else forgot, in showing up enough times that someone finally believed you would show up again. Richard had taken the credit for rebuilding trust, but he had never built any. Olivia said, Wherever you go next, I hope they know what they have. I swallowed. Thank you. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time. Maya came over. You okay? I nodded. This time I meant it. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Richard still had his title. Brightline still had its lawyers. The clients were still under contract. My future was still uncertain. But something had changed. For months I thought leaving meant losing. Losing the project. Losing the company. Losing the chance to prove what I had done. Now I understood. Leaving had done what staying never could. It had shown them the shape of what they had taken for granted. My final day arrived on a Friday. At 4:45 p.m. I sent my last transition email. It contained links to all approved account records, open action items, system locations, and ownership recommendations. I copied Richard, Victoria, HR, legal, Maya, and the assigned account owners. The final line read, Then I closed my laptop. I placed my badge on the desk. Maya walked me to the elevator. For once she did not joke. When we reached the doors, she hugged me hard. You did the right thing, she said. I hope so. No, she said, pulling back. You did. The elevator doors opened. Before I stepped in, I looked across the office one last time. Richard was standing outside Victoria's office. He looked smaller than he had 2 weeks earlier. Not physically, but somehow diminished. The title was still there. The promotion was still real, but the certainty had drained out of him. He saw me looking. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then his phone rang. He looked down at the screen. I saw the name from where I stood. Richard stared at it like it was a threat. The elevator doors began to close. Just before they met, I saw Victoria step out of her office and say something to him. I could not hear the words, but I saw Richard's face, and I knew. The clients were no longer asking where I was. They were asking whether Brightline had ever understood them without me. That was a much harder question, and Richard had no answer. I thought leaving Brightline would feel like the end. For the first few days, it did. There was no morning alarm screaming at 6 a.m., no inbox already full before coffee, no Richard sending vague messages that somehow meant 3 hours of work, no emergency client call, no executive deck, no meeting where I had to sit quietly while someone else explained my own strategy back to me incorrectly. For the first time in almost a year, my apartment was quiet. Not peaceful at first, just quiet. I woke up on Monday morning at 7:15 out of habit, reached for my phone, and then remembered there was nothing I needed to check. No Brightline inbox, no calendar filled with meetings I had not been invited to until someone needed me. No Project Meridian. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the gray Chicago morning outside my window, and felt something I had not expected. Grief. Not because I regretted leaving. I did not. But because I had loved parts of that work, I had loved solving complicated problems, I had loved earning a client's trust, I had loved taking a mess of broken conversations, scattered data, and corporate excuses and turning it into something clear enough to fix. I had not hated the work. I had hated being erased from it. That was an important difference. For 2 days, I let myself be tired. I cleaned my apartment. I slept past 8. I cooked actual meals instead of eating cereal over my laptop. I ignored LinkedIn notifications because every corporate congratulations post suddenly made me want to throw my phone into Lake Michigan. Maya checked on me every night. On Wednesday, she texted. I replied. She sent back. I stared at the message. Part of me wanted to ask. Part of me did not. I typed. The answer came immediately. I laughed for the first time in days. Not loudly, not happily exactly, but honestly. Then Maya sent another message. My smile faded. I sat up straighter. I looked at the screen for a long moment. Then I placed the phone down. The truth was moving without me now. That was the strange thing about documentation. When you are collecting it, it feels small, petty even. Screenshots, timestamps, emails, file names, calendar changes, lines of proof gathered quietly at the end of humiliating days. But when the right people finally look at it, the small things become a pattern. And a pattern is much harder to dismiss than pain. By Friday afternoon, Victoria Hayes called me. I almost did not answer. Her name on my screen brought back the conference rooms, the glass walls, the way she had praised Richard for a vision that was mine. I had no desire to be pulled back into Brightline's damage control, but I answered. This is Natalie. Natalie, it's Victoria. Her voice sounded different, less polished, more careful. Hi, Victoria. Do you have a few minutes? I looked at the half-folded laundry on my couch. Yes. There was a pause. I want to start by saying this is not a request for unpaid work, and I'm not asking you to assist with client transition. That surprised me. Okay. I'm calling because the internal review has progressed and your documentation has been very helpful. I said nothing. Victoria continued. We have verified the original Meridian drafts, the model creation records, several email threads, and the meeting invite changes you documented. My hand tightened around the phone. We also reviewed Richard's board presentation and the leadership materials associated with his promotion. I waited. For months I had wanted someone to say the words, not carefully, not vaguely, clearly. Victoria took a breath. There were serious misrepresentations. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not quite an apology. Not yet justice. But truth had finally entered an official sentence. Victoria said Richard claimed authorship and strategic ownership of work that originated with you. For a moment I could not speak. I had imagined that sentence so many times. I had imagined it in anger, in meetings, in HR complaints, in arguments I never had. But hearing it now, alone in my apartment, wearing sweatpants with unfolded laundry on the couch, it did not feel victorious. It felt heavy, because the truth did not undo the year I had spent doubting myself. It did not give me back the nights I stayed late. It did not erase the moment everyone clapped for him while I stood outside the glass. Still, it mattered. It mattered that someone finally said it out loud. Victoria's voice softened. I should have seen it sooner. I opened my eyes. Yes, said. No comfort. No rescue. Just truth. She accepted it. You're right. That surprised me more than anything else, she continued. Richard has been placed on administrative leave pending the final outcome of the review. I looked toward the window. Below, traffic moved slowly along the street, indifferent to corporate downfall. Okay, I said. We're also contacting the affected clients directly to clarify account leadership and transition planning. That's good. Natalie. I knew what was coming before she said it. We would like to discuss the possibility of you returning. I almost smiled. There it was, the company version of regret, a title after humiliation, a salary increase after silence, a seat at the table after I had already left the building. Victoria spoke quickly, as if she knew she had limited time before I refused. Not under Richard, obviously. We would create a director of strategic accounts role. You would report directly to me. Full ownership of enterprise recovery frameworks, clear authorship protections, compensation adjustment. I can have HR prepare a formal offer. A month earlier, those words would have felt like oxygen. Director. Direct report to the COO. Ownership, protection, recognition, everything I had wanted, everything I had been told I was not ready for. And that was exactly why I could not say yes immediately. Because I needed to know whether I wanted the role or whether I only wanted the wound corrected by the people who caused it. I said, "Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If I had not resigned, would this role exist?" Silence. I already knew the answer, but I needed her to sit with it. Finally, she said, "Probably not." I nodded, though she could not see me. "Then I need you to understand why that matters." "I do." "I don't think you do," I said gently. Another silence. Then Victoria said, "You're right. Maybe I don't fully." I walked to the window. The city looked cold and bright. For almost a year, I did the work. I built the framework. I held the client relationships together. I warned people through the work itself that these accounts needed careful handling. But Brightline only recognized my value after Richard failed to carry what he stole. Victoria did not interrupt. "That means the company did not reward the work," I said. "It reacted to the loss." The words felt simple, clean, true. Victoria exhaled slowly. "I can't argue with that." "No," I said. "You can't." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I am sorry, Natalie. This time it sounded different, less like a line, more like a person." I appreciated that, but I was no longer willing to confuse an apology with a future. "Thank you," I said. "Will you consider the offer?" I looked at the city. "I'll consider it, but I'm also exploring other opportunities." "I understand." Before we ended the call, Victoria said one more thing. "For what it's worth, Olivia Grant asked whether you were available for consulting." I laughed softly. "She did?" "Yes. Legal told her we could not facilitate that while reviewing account matters, but she was very clear that her trust was with you. Trust was with you." After we hung up, I stood by the window for a long time. I thought I would feel satisfied hearing that Richard was on leave. I thought there would be a sharp, clean pleasure in knowing his promotion had started to collapse. But the feeling was quieter than that. Richard losing was not the same as me winning. That was another important difference. A week later, the final review concluded. Maya called me before the official news reached most of the company. "He's out," she said. I was making coffee. I stopped. "Richard?" "Yeah." "Fired?" "Officially, he resigned after an internal review." I almost laughed. "Of course he did." "That's corporate, for we found enough." I leaned against the counter. "What about the VP role?" "Gone. They're restructuring the department." "And Meridian?" "Victoria is taking direct oversight for now. Also," Maya paused. "What?" "They updated the internal project archive." I held the phone tighter. "To what?" "Project Meridian now lists you as original framework creator." For some reason, that hit harder than the rest. Not because of the archive itself. Most people would never see it. It would not trend on LinkedIn. It would not erase the all-hands applause. It would not undo Richard's speech. But somewhere inside the company system, the lie had been corrected. My name had been put back where it belonged. I looked down at my coffee and realized my eyes were burning. Maya's voice softened. "You okay?" I nodded, then remembered she could not see me. "Yeah," I said. "I think so. You should be proud." "I'm tired of being proud of surviving things." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "That's fair." 3 weeks after leaving Brightline, I interviewed with a smaller analytics firm called Harborline Strategy. Their office was not as impressive. No 36th floor, no glass lobby, no espresso machine that looked like it had been designed by NASA. Just a renovated brick building near the river, a receptionist who actually looked up when I walked in, and a conference room with plants that seemed to be alive by choice. The CEO, Thomas Reed, interviewed me himself. He was in his early 50s, with rolled-up sleeves, tired eyes, and the kind of directness that made me relax instead of brace. He had read about Brightline's client recovery work through industry contacts. Not all of it. Enough. He asked, "Can you tell me what Project Meridian actually was?" I smiled faintly. "No one has asked me that in a while." "Then I'd like to." So I told him. Not the polished executive version, the real one. I told him about Grantwell's broken Monday reports, Ellison's distrust of inflated projections, Northstar's exhaustion with rotating account owners. I told him about trust gaps, decision-maker psychology, risk models, and why retention strategies fail when companies treat clients like contract dates instead of relationships. Thomas listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "That sounds less like account management and more like organizational truth-telling." I blinked. That was the first description of my work that felt accurate. Yes, I said. That's exactly what it is. He smiled. Good. We need that. The role they offered me was Director of Client Strategy. Not eventually. Not after I proved myself again. Now. The offer was lower than Brightline's possible counteroffer would have been, but the structure was better. Direct ownership, written authorship standards, client strategy authority, no vague promises about future visibility. I asked difficult questions. Who owns strategy frameworks? How are contributions credited? What happens when a client relationship is built by one person? How do you prevent managers from taking authorship of subordinate work? Thomas answered some questions well, some imperfectly, but he did not punish me for asking. That mattered. Before accepting, I called Victoria. It felt strange, but necessary. She answered quickly. Natalie. Hi, Victoria. I wanted to let you know I've accepted another role. There was a pause. I see. I appreciated the offer from Brightline, but I don't think returning is the right decision for me. I understand. I expected her to sound disappointed. She did, but not angry. After a moment, she said, Harborline? I laughed quietly. Industry news travels fast. It does. Another pause. Then Victoria said, They're lucky. The sentence was simple. I let myself receive it. Thank you. And Natalie? Yes? For what it's worth, you changed things here. I looked down at the offer letter on my kitchen table. I hope so. You did. After we hung up, I signed the offer. 2 months later, I walked into Harborline's conference room for my first major client presentation. It was not as glamorous as Brightline's executive floor. The table had a scratch near one corner. The projector took too long to connect. Someone had brought bagels in a cardboard box and forgotten napkins. But when the title slide appeared, I stopped breathing for half a second. At the top it read, and beneath it, my name. Not hidden, not removed, not placed under support. Right there. Where it belonged, across the table sat Olivia Grant. Not as a Brightline client anymore. Her contract had not moved immediately. That would have violated timelines, procurement rules, and everything companies pretend makes business clean. But after Grantwell's contract period ended, Olivia had opened a new vendor review. Harborline had competed, fairly, legally, and won. When Olivia walked into the room that morning, she shook my hand and smiled. Good to see the right person leading the room. For a second, I was back outside the glass conference room at Brightline, watching Richard smile under stolen applause. Then the memory passed, because this room was different. I was not outside it, I was at the front. Thomas sat to the side, not above me, not speaking over me, not waiting to rename my work as his leadership. Maya had joined Harborline 2 weeks after I did, because apparently watching corporate karma in real time had made her emotionally allergic to Brightline, as she put it. She sat near the screen, laptop open, giving me a small nod. Olivia took her seat. The room quieted. I placed my hands lightly on the table. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel the need to prove that I belonged. I simply began. Thank you for being here, I said. Before we talk about solutions, we're going to talk honestly about trust. Olivia smiled. Not because the meeting would be easy. It would not. Trust recovery never was. But this time, no one in the room was pretending the work belonged to someone else. No one was hiding the damage behind polished words. No one was asking me to feed answers from outside the door. I clicked to the next slide. The strategy was strong. The data was clean. The client history was accurate, and my name stayed exactly where it was. Later that evening, after the meeting ended and the client team left, I stood alone in the conference room looking at the blank screen. Maya came in carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. You were scary good in there, she said. I took 1 cup. Scary? In a calm, expensive consultant way. I laughed. She leaned against the table. Do you ever think about Richard? I looked toward the window. Sometimes I did. Not often, but sometimes. I had heard he tried to find another executive role. For a while, his LinkedIn said he was exploring strategic opportunities, which Maya said was corporate language for unemployed but using nouns aggressively. Eventually, he joined a smaller firm in a vague advisory position. I did not follow closely. That surprised me most of all. For months, Richard had occupied so much space in my mind. His approval, his manipulation, his theft, his warnings, his downfall. Then slowly he became smaller. Just a chapter, not the story. I think about what I learned, I said. Maya nodded. That sounds healthier than what I hoped you'd say. What did you hope I'd say? That you imagined him stepping barefoot on a Lego every morning. I smiled. That too. We both laughed. Then the room grew quiet. I looked at the place where my title slide had been. For a long time, I believed the worst thing someone could do was steal your work. I was wrong. The worst thing is convincing you that you should be grateful for the chance to watch them do it. Richard had taken my project and used it to climb. But he had forgotten something simple. A slide deck can be copied, a model can be renamed, a meeting can be controlled, a promotion can be built on someone else's labor. But trust cannot be copy-pasted. Trust has memory. Clients remember who answered when the situation was ugly. They remember who told the truth when a lie would have been easier. They remember who understood the damage before trying to sell the solution. And sooner or later, so do companies. Richard thought removing my name from Project Meridian would make the work his, but all he had really done was attach his name to a machine he did not know how to operate. And when I walked away, I did not take anything that was not mine. I did not steal data. I did not break rules. I did not burn the building down. I simply stopped holding up a lie. And without me standing quietly behind it, the lie collapsed under its own weight. That was the lesson I carried with me. Not that revenge is loud. Not that justice always comes quickly. Not even that good work always gets recognized when it should. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes people clap for the wrong person. Sometimes the room rewards the thief before it notices the architect standing outside the glass. But if you know what you built, document the truth. If someone tries to erase you, leave a record. If they call your silence professionalism, ask who benefits from it. And when the time comes, do not be afraid to walk away from a room that only values you after your absence becomes expensive. Because the right room will not need to lose you to understand your worth. It will put your name on the first slide and let you lead.